What is the average cost of bringing an AI model to the bedside? Numbers between 5 and 10 million US bucks and taking 3 to 5 years. Now, as an early medtech company, that is a very, very difficult time horizon that you need to fund. And we very often see failure rates in the high 90%. From an investor point of view, the ROI is terrible. And as an innovator, because you've had to finance this long period of time, you have to charge a really high price for your innovation. And then the top hospital groups may say, yeah, okay, I can afford to pay $500,000 or $1 million a year for a license for this tool. But the majority of hospitals can't. So your ROI is really, really poor. So in this new world that we're talking about, where we are now moving towards is, can we bring down the unit economic cost of validating, certifying, evidencing an AI model by a factor of 100? So can we deliver it for $50K, $100K? Then suddenly you can charge a lot less, which means you can actually deliver that AI to all of the hospital groups, the 22,000 hospitals we have in Europe and the US.
Welcome, MedTech Gurus. Today, as I mentioned in the introduction, we're joined by an extraordinary guest, Benedikt von Thüngen, CEO and co-founder of Sanome. Benedikt's story is one of a remarkable perseverance, resilience, and innovation. After steering Sanome through a devastating series of personal tragedies, including the loss of family and friends, he refused to give up. Instead, he rebuilt the company from the brink of collapse. Today, Sanome is leading the way in AI-powered clinical decision support using its memory platform to detect and predict hospital-acquired infections up to 72 hours earlier than traditional methods. Under Benedikt's leadership, Sanome became the first UK-built AI company to receive Class IIb approval for such a system and has already delivered more than £1.1 million in savings at earlier partner sites like the Royal Hospital for Neurodisability. Hey, Benedikt, are you ready to be our guru today?
Hey, good morning, Tom. Don't know about being a guru, but very happy to be part of it and share some of the lessons learned over the last 2-3 years that we've been building this.
Yeah, that's fantastic. We're excited to have you. So tell us something fun or interesting about yourself or your family so we can get to know you a little better.
Gosh, something fun. I'm a workaholic. Something fun and something unusual and something I don't often talk about is I've grown up between 3 different countries, cultures, political systems, went to 8 different schools out of the 12 possible ones. Totally. That's my normal, but what I've learned over the years that is totally unnormal for most people.
Yeah, we'll call that a well-rounded education. How's that?
Oh, no. I mean, you sound almost like an estate agent that's able to say that a house next to a major traffic road is well connected.
Yeah, right. I love it. So, Benedikt, your journey with Sanome has been nothing short of extraordinary, as I mentioned in the intro. And I'm wondering if you can just help our gurus out there, and walk us through what happened during that collapse of your original seed round, and really more importantly, how you managed to rebuild after such personal and professional setbacks. Would you mind sharing that with us?
Yeah, absolutely. And thank you for the question. And I'll take a slight step back and just set the scene. So the personal drive to start the company was my father, who was a lifelong sufferer of bipolar disorder. And that meant he would go up and he would go down. And when I still lived with him and when I was his carer, I could always tell when he would start going off the rails. And I could tell on a variety of different data points. Is he taking his medication? Yes or no? How is his demeanor today? How is he talking? How is he behaving? All of those kind of lots of different types of data points. And I was then always able to pick them up and say, I think he's going off the rails. And I could then intervene and change the course of the disease effectively. So I started this company about 4.5 years ago against that same big vision and saying, hey, can we make your health understood? So can clinical teams, family members, healthcare professionals understand your health? And if they understand your health, can they then provide better care? So that was the big vision. And particularly during the time of COVID, we saw this massive explosion of digitization and data available. But there was this big gap between data and decision making. And that's the gap that we went in at Sanome to start. And we initially started off looking at the at-home space. So can we aggregate data in an at-home setting and translate that data into clinical decision support teams to stop people from admitting to hospital? And what we realized after 2 years and an original funding round was the people that collect data at home don't really get sick. So we had to pivot the company to a degree and say, where is there lots and lots and lots of data, and where are there adverse events that we could predict that lead to better patient outcomes, but also to better financial and operational outcomes for providers? And that naturally took us into the hospital realm. And now we're moving into the area that Tom, that you've alluded to. So about 2 years ago, we've just finished the pivot. We've just started working with some incredible providers here in the UK and across Europe that were sharing all of their data with us in real time, allowing us to build AI models that could start predicting these adverse events. And some of you may remember 2023, 2024 was a really tough time for funding, particularly in the healthcare and medtech space. So we'd spoken to 200 plus investors. We were very lucky that there was a seed round that was starting to come together. Our existing investors at the time were backing us and supporting us to go through. And that was February, March last year. And then because I was so busy and I was working so much, my father unfortunately started going off the rails and then took his own life March last year. And in what's been very difficult, or what was very difficult, and no hard feelings to the investors at the time, is that critical period where you're doing your due diligence and you're trying to create that syndicate. I was not present, I was not there. And so the round unfortunately fell apart. And in many ways, that was the right thing to have happened at the time. Because what was needed is, because of that historic initial part of the company, there was a former co-founder who was on the cap table. The cap table was pretty messy. Mm-hmm. So the only option I had at the time, and because I believed in that vision of Your Health Understood, and I could see the early results and the relationship with partner hospitals, I went all in. So I was very, very lucky from a previous company of mine, Speechmatics. I've had a partial exit, so I took those funds and just went, I said, you know what, I'm going to buy out this company and fund it myself. I've just been really, really lucky because the team really believed in it. And the team said, hey, Benedikt, we love what we're doing. We believe in the same vision. We've all had personal stories. We know we've lost loved ones because clinical teams did not understand them, or clinical teams missed their deterioration too late. So we huddled together as a team and we pulled through. And this is really testament to the team. Yes, I was lucky enough to have the money available, but it was really the team that pulled it through, and that gave me a kind of an anchor point where I could hold on to. And then fate sometimes has an odd one of dealing you. I think the Brits always say, when it rains, it pours. That as that was happening, one of my best friends, it was his stag do. He was going to get married 3 weeks later. We were on his stag do and he had an accident and he broke his neck. And so we pulled him out of the water dead. We resuscitated him. Very fortunately, he's still alive today, but he's paralyzed, neck downwards. And he's now very slowly, painfully on that very, very long, lifelong journey to regain the ability to walk. And maybe he's lucky and will walk. But again, that is for him, seeing him going through that rehab journey and the complexity of the care required for him. Yet again, it kept coming back to the thing: how can we help clinical teams understand him and his unique physiology, his healthcare needs, his background, his health, and how can we help them intervene earlier for him to receive better treatment? So that was for me almost another guiding light of saying what we are doing is so desperately needed. Mm-hmm. And that was last summer. And if I were to summarize it, how do we rebuild? I've just been lucky to have an unbelievable team around me. I've had some very, very big moments that were, yes, very, very difficult that I was able to turn around and take as motivation. And the prize was that some of the existing investors who'd lost out a lot on that first round of financing came back and said, we would still like to be part of this journey. And then they reinvested at the back end of last year. So huge shout out to Heal Capital and some of our amazing angels. And that then gave me and the team enough confidence to say we're on the right track. And because everyone who's gone through the regulatory process knows how brutal it gets and how much it's a team effort to get through regulatory clearance. And in the summer this year, we finally received our European medical device certification. So we're fully C certified now as a Class IIb medical device for the first use case on a platform where we are building 1,000 clinical insights. Right? I think there's actually 55,000 clinical decisions that could be supported by AI if you take ICD-10 codes. And by that, I mean, is this patient developing sepsis, infections? What's their length of stay going to be? Can I step this patient down? Do I need to intubate them? All of these, right? But there's about 1,000 of them that have sufficient value and a kind of high enough frequency that could be supported by AI. And that's the platform we're now building, is you have one singular platform that summarizes all of the data and then translates that into decision support tools to help a clinician understand the patient better, intervene earlier.
Yeah. And well, first of all, my condolences for your father and the tragedy that your friend experienced. However, I want to dive into that comeback, if you will, right? Because I think there's a really interesting lesson learned here for other gurus out there. So take us back into that story, right? You went through those challenges and the tragedies that you faced. And after facing that insolvency, how did you secure that 1.2 million pounds in new investment and get things back on track? Was there a sentinel moment in there, or what was the strategy that helped achieve that?
God, that's a very good question. And if I put myself back last summer, early autumn, I think a lot of it was perseverance and just resilience. And I think I was probably in shock, and I just couldn't even think about anything else other than let's just execute. Let's really execute. And I think being so open and so vulnerable with that investor base, it can go two ways. But I think generally speaking, being very open and transparent about where you are and what you're doing. And I think what they looked at is they said, hey, actually, fundamentally, there's companies doing something amazing. And then they look at the founder and the founding team and said, what is the most important thing you look at pre-seed, seed, even at Series A as an investor point, is you're looking at the founding team. And has the founding team got the resilience to just motor through? Because there's always going to be tough times. And I can't speak on their behalf, but I would guess that's that combination of there's a great company coming and a founding team that against all odds is just executing. And the third one was I was communicating very, very openly on what was happening. And Heal Capital said, hey, we're willing to give you another shot.
Yeah, that's fantastic. And I want to ask about that team, right? Because culture is so often overlooked, especially during a rebuild. So with all this, if I can call it noise, right? All this stuff going on, how did you maintain or reinvent that culture for Sanome during this phase?
Yeah, that's a huge shout out to my new co-founder, old co-founder, Paul. This is the second company we're building together. He's been my number two for the last 10 years, coming up 10 years now. And he has two or three very, very core principles that he always operates against. And he said, be open and honest, right? In these kind of rebuild things, there's no point trying to hide. People feel if something's not off, right? People feel if they're not being told the full truth. So he sat down or had a conversation with every single team member and said, hey, Benedikt's going all in. I need to know that you're going to be all in as well, because I'm not going to let Benedikt put all of his money at risk and his health at risk. That's the deal we're going to make. And every single team member said, yeah, I'm in. And then you suddenly have a very, very strong trusted bond, because you're going in, and you have that personal commitment. And a couple of team members took some time out. They went away, had a reflection, but they all came back and said, I want to do it. So this very open and honest situation was great. And I think they've been, the going was obviously tough, and the regulatory journey is very, very, very tough. And I think by that 12 months later, going through the regs process, that's when their going got tough, right? And I think what we see today is that call, we went through the doldrums.
Yeah, it's interesting, right? And how that openness and that transparency. I mean, what I'm hearing is, it helped you with not only your current team, but it also helped you with your investors, right? So it's tough to do, I would think, right, to share all of this and open that up. But at the same time, the flip side is it really builds trust. Am I heading down the right track with that?
Absolutely, and that's really down Paul. Really living it. And you see a lot of companies with lots of these value statements and slogans, but I think until the going really gets tough, that's when you see, does someone really live the values, but then also does the team member live those values, and have you hired and have you built that right team? And that's just been amazing, and it's really Paul's doing. He's managed to keep that team together and moving.
So Benedikt, you touched on the achieving your Class IIb approval in the UK, which is no small feat.
Europe. It's not only the UK, actually, it's Europe.
Oh, it's Europe. Okay, yeah. So we know that it's no small feat, right? We've heard from other gurus out there that it's actually become more stringent than the FDA in the US at some levels. So what were some of the challenges that you faced in getting the memory through the regulatory approval? Can you give us some insights there?
Yeah, 100%. And I think it's challenges that every company is developing AI for healthcare, or clinical AI is facing at the moment. It's such a new technology, particularly non-imaging related AI, that we're working at the cutting edge of how do we regulate these things, right? How do we? What is quality? What is performance of a model? Right? It's not like you have an assay and you can test it 2,000 times and it's always going to give you the same results, and you then have your true positives and all that kind of wonderful stuff. Whereas an AI changes based on the data coming in, an AI changes because clinical practice changes, models degrade or improve over time. So AI is a really tricky beast, and how do you work with the regulators on solving that? And it's been amazing, because I think the key bit, and that's where we're now very openly moving towards, is what the big challenge we very often have in medical devices, or particularly software as a medical device, is I've built a model on a certain set of data, and then it doesn't translate well into clinical practice, no matter what studies I've done in between. And let's be really honest, right? We all design the studies so that try and give more favorable outcomes. Is it just about enough to get over the regulatory hurdle? And what I think that shift is now moving towards, and one that we're particularly proud of, is actually the secret sauce now happens in your post-market surveillance and post-market clinical follow-up studies. Because that is how you see the device or the software performing in real time. Now, we have a very big unfair advantage in that a number of hospital groups have believe in us and trusted us, in that they're sharing all of their clinical data with us in real time. And that means every 5 seconds we get an entire copy of every clinical note, pathology report, prescription data, etc., etc., etc. Now, that gives us the perfect setup for a PMS, PMCF. So I can now build an AI model on that data. I can validate that AI model works. And now I can, once I put it into clinical practice, I can see in real time, is that model performing as it's meant to be performing? Is that model delivering the clinical outcomes that I have defined with the clinical teams and agreed on with the regulators? So can we prove that it's safe? And can we prove that it's effective? And that is, from a regulatory point of view, super, super exciting because you're now no longer waiting for some adverse events reporting.
Right.
You can now see, and that's what we're now working with our notified body on, is how can we actually build a transparent framework that these 1,000 AI models that we're building, that you can see in real time is actually working. Now, that starts changing the paradigm of the whole regulatory viewpoint, because you can now say, okay, build an AI model. And obviously, you've got to adhere to a ton of standards and safety, but you can get that into clinical practice much, 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 much faster, because you follow that, because you have that safety mechanism of that real world evidence coming through. So suddenly the notified bodies or the regulators, the FDA, who are often seen by many people as innovation blockers, which I fundamentally disagree with, can become innovation accelerators because they can make sure that the baseline works, but because they can then rely on a trusted post-market surveillance system. That's, for us, a critical piece and a total game changer from a unit economics point of view, because you'll probably know this, Tom, and stop me if I'm waffling or going off script, but what is the average cost of bringing an AI model to the bedside? It's numbers between 5 and 10 million US bucks, and taking 3 to 5 years. Now, as an early medtech company, that is a very, very difficult time horizon that you need to fund. And we very often see failure rates in the high 90%. And from an investor point of view, the ROI is terrible. And then as an innovator, because you've had to finance this long period of time, you have to charge a really high price for your innovation. And then the top hospital groups may say, yeah, okay, I can afford to pay $500,000 or $1 million a year for a license for this tool. But the majority of hospitals can't. So your ROI is really, really poor. So in this new world that we're talking about, where we're now moving towards is, can we bring down the unit economic cost of validating, certifying, evidencing an AI model by a factor of 100? So can we deliver it for $50K, $100K? Then suddenly you can charge a lot less, which means you can actually deliver that AI to all of the hospital groups, the 22,000 hospitals we have in Europe and the US.
That's interesting. And to build on that for a second, if I've got this right, you had the implementation at the Royal Hospital for Neurodisability, right, which led to some impressive outcomes. So with what you just were explaining in terms of the ROI, what did that look like in terms of clinical adoption and financial savings? Do you have any input on that?
Yeah, so it's obviously still very early days, and the evidence is very early, and a statistician will tell me it's not statistically significant yet, but anecdotally I can share a lot of things. So let's start with the clinical adoption piece, and the adoption bit is really interesting. Having built a software company before this, adoption is kind of everything that matters. Product is everything that matters. But we go into the medtech world where very much it's about the tech and the performance of the tech. Because that's what we need to show to a regulator. We need to show that it's safe and it works. And only then do we think about adoption right at the end. But because of the long time cycles, we can't really do iterative co-design. So that's one of the core things we try to tackle from day one onwards. Is very, very tight integration cycles with the clinical groups. And what we learned were 3 key things. The first one is you have to meet the clinical teams in their workflow. So it has to be, unfortunately or fortunately, depending on how you look at it, embedded in the EMR, because that is the toolbox that a clinician uses every single day. And we've seen some amazing technologies that sit outside of the EMR because they're so game-changing that they will use it. But hospital CIOs, hospital IT groups are increasingly saying, no, we want everything centralized in the EMR. So number one, you have to meet them in the EMR. So, and we did that from day one onwards, and that saves the clinician 3 clicks. That's already, they love that. The second bit is by doing a lot of co-design very early on and then continuously through the cycle, we made sure that the tool we built really fitted into their workflows. and really fit it into their decision-making patterns. Clinicians always talk about alert fatigue, I don't want to get another alert. So when we sat down and said, okay, what type of alert would you like and what type of information do you want alongside an alert? And what we then realized is they still want to be alerted, but they want to be alerted when they make a decision. So a handover meeting, an escalation meeting, an MDT meeting, they just want to have the information, this is the risk of a patient, because at that point in time, they're making a decision what I need to do. The second thing that worked really well was that clinical teams wanted not only alert, but what should I do with this information? So we call that next best actions. So we work with clinical teams saying, if we push you this information in your pathway or in your guideline, this is what you would tell that member of staff to go away and do. And then the third one, and that's really been the biggest game changer, was to have an explainable AI component. So why am I alerting you to this patient? So in our case, or the first use case in infection is, what are the data points that have led to the AI believing that this patient is developing an infection, so that a clinician can almost backsolve it and say, oh yes, okay, now looking at that data, I can see that same trend and I agree or concur with it. And actually, I will add a fourth point because that was quite interesting, is every clinician works at a slightly different threshold. And by that, I mean is sensitivity, specificity. So if you have a high-risk patient, you may be quite comfortable having a larger number of false alerts because you'd rather know. So let's take a respiratory patient or even an ICU patient, you'd rather know. But if you have a stable patient, say a level 2 rehab patient, you don't want to be annoyed by lots of alerts. So you're comfortable taking that shorter time window effectively. And the feature we then sat on top of it is we can now adjust the model to ping. It could ping earlier, but with less performance or less accuracy. So you have a high number of false alerts, or it can ping closer to the event, but be more accurate. And clinicians love that feature because it meets them again in their requirement. So if I were to summarize it, it has to be in the EMR. It has to be with very, very close co-design. And then the third one is, and it's just so simple, but I don't know why so many companies forget to do this. The adoption piece, we spend a lot of time early on in really making sure that clinicians love it. And we create super users. And it's typically some of we've got a phenomenal clinical deployment lead. They have a sixth sense of who are the ones that everyone else is following. And you elevate them, turn them into your super users. They get an apron with a little badge on it. And it's like, come and ask me if you've got a question around this memory tool. And that puts smiles because so often now it's like, oh, the EMR is not working. Please call this hotline. And then they spend on the phone with some IT hotline and they're waiting 10 minutes before they get on the line just to figure out something out. And by creating these super users, it empowers some people to do some more, but it gets other people to say, oh, I'm just going to quickly ask them, what does that mean? And suddenly you've got this word of mouth in the hospital that is now driving this adoption because people say, oh, wow, it makes my life so much easier. And to give you a really nice anecdote from last week when I walked onto the wards, the matron kind of saw me across the corridor, and the matrons are some of the busiest people on the ward. He just saw me and ran over to me and just gave me a massive bear hug. He said, Benedikt, it's so good to have you here. It's so amazing because I understand my patients a little bit better. It's just so nice, and it's just great. Right? And everything always starts with the adoption. And now we're in this really interesting world, and coming back to the stats, what we're seeing anecdotally is a reduction in infection events. We've seen anecdotally a reduction in sepsis events, transfers to high acuity. Now, is that because the staff are just more cognizant and they're doing better hand washing, better infection control, better comms? Or is it because the model's working? Well, actually, I don't care because the outcome is the same, right?
Right. Yeah. Well, first of all, thanks for that summary. That was excellent. And I love the adoption part, right? Because, when you get that kind of response, that's really the bottom line is why we're all in this business, right? To know that we've helped clinicians and the patients they serve. But I wanted to ask you a little bit about the co-design piece, right?
Sure.
If you found that uncomfortable at all, because really, I mean, you're in a very competitive environment, right? Everybody's chasing this, and here you are sharing, you're kind of opening the kimono, right? And you're kind of sharing all this. Was that uncomfortable at all, or do you feel like that was so critical it wasn't really that big of an issue?
I would say it's the most critical bit, and it was so natural and intuitive for us. I'm so surprised when I speak to other people in this space that they look at me or you go to a conference, right? And you have these workshops on user-centered design and why co-design is important. And I go like, guys, like, seriously? Like, look into the software world, and we've been doing this for decades because if a user doesn't like it, they won't use it, period. Right? It doesn't matter how good it is. Like, it's that simple. So yeah. I it's paramount.
Yeah, I love that. So Benedikt, I want to just shift gears for just a moment because you've got another interesting piece in your background, right? You serve as an enterprise hub mentor at the Royal Academy of Engineering.
Sure.
So I'm just kind of curious how that experience has shaped your own leadership style and what insights you've gained from mentoring other emerging healthcare founders.
Yeah. I've been very, very fortunate that over the last 10 or 15 years, I've got to serve on a number of different programs as a mentor. The Royal Academy of Engineering is one of them, and the master's degree course at Cambridge University on Bioscience Enterprise is another one, and another foundation I built. And I personally love going back and giving back. But what have I learned? I think by speaking to so many companies, and it's probably north of 100 companies now that I've had the absolute honor of spending, sometimes it's an hour, sometimes it's multiple sessions, is you get such a breadth of different viewpoints of how to solve a problem. And that flexibility and adaptability to there are multiple ways of solving problems is something that I hope we are using here at Sanome as well. And I think it's also reflective of the culture we're building here that is highly, highly diverse, hopefully also representative of wider healthcare, that these different perspectives are coming in. And we sometimes have these really interesting discussions about where you have it's not three different opinions, it's three different ways of how to solve the same problem. And then it's just, how do you go about bringing that together? And that's just amazing. And I've also been very, very lucky, and it's very humbling. You see a couple of these companies you've worked with 5 years ago or so, and now you're looking at the founder, and they've become really good friends over time, and they're running super, super successful companies, and with tens, if not hundreds, of employees. You go like, maybe I should have gotten involved back then, right?
Yeah, right. That's fantastic. So, Benedikt, this seems like a really exciting time for memory and Sanome. What does the future hold? Where are you and your team going from here?
Yeah, so we've got three key things that we're now really focused on. So the first one is how can we enrich the memory platform with more and more insights that help clinicians answer two questions. Who is this patient in front of me? And what's happening with this patient? So always bridging the gap between data and decision making. And there are 1,000 clinical decisions that we're now starting to execute against. So we're already busily working on the next 10 clinical insights that go on the platform. There are some of the obvious ones, so infections, sepsis, kidney failure, all the things that lead to increases in length of stay in a hospital. And then some of the operational ones, such as what's the likelihood of readmission if I discharge this patient out? Or is this patient clinically fit for discharge? Or what's their likely length of stay going to be? So those 10 are all very, very heavily geared to improve productivity in a hospital. By productivity, I mean patient flow. So we want to move more patients through the hospital, which means greater margins for the providers, particularly in very big inner city hospitals where throughput is everything. So for us, that's really where we're now heavily executing against. We've developed the next set of models, making them available through the platform. And that brings me to the second one, which is we want very robust clinical evidence. So this real world evidence platform we were talking about just earlier, we're now really gearing up to really show not only can we develop models a lot faster and cheaper, but those models are leading to better clinical outcomes, but also better financial outcomes for our hospitals. And then 3, and that's really the most exciting bit, and I'll tie everything together, is we've formed a number of strategic partnerships with EMR providers and amazing forward-looking organizations that serve hundreds and hundreds of hospitals. And we're now working with them to turn their EMR into an AI-enabled EMR or an intelligent EMR. So not only is now this a billing platform and a patient CRM, we're now turning it into, hey, who is this patient and what's happening to my patient and how can I provide better care? And now this gets really spooky. So if you think about 10 insights, we can put a number on it, let's just call it $500,000. And we've got visibility of 2,000 hospitals. You sum those numbers up, 10 times 500 times 2,000, you're looking at a $10 billion business, ARR business that we're executing against. And that creates not only fantastic financial returns, but also creates a wonderful data flywheel. The more patients we see, the more data we have, the better models we build, the more insights we can build. That then builds a better product. That means there's more hospitals again. And you just start kind of this flywheel of now moving increasingly to a world where 10 insights turn into 100, turn to 1,000 insights. And you start getting to something, the buzzword is a digital twin, but really what that means is I'm building a platform that you, Tom, or me, or any other person on this planet, as soon as they go into healthcare, you have a model that truly understands who they are to support the physician to provide the best possible care for you. That is N equals 1. Right? That is a future that I think we've all been dreaming about, but the exciting thing is we're building it today and delivering it tomorrow.
Oh, that's fantastic. So, Benedikt, first of all, I want to acknowledge and thank you for the time and insights that you brought to us today as our guru. If anybody wants to learn more, if our gurus out there want to learn more about what you and your team are up to, how do we do that? Are you on LinkedIn? Is there a website, social media? How do we find out more about what you're up to?
Yeah, absolutely. So you can always find me on LinkedIn, Benedikt von Thüngen, or you can find me on Sanome. I'm very active there, so that's the best way of getting in contact with me. You can find me on our website. That's something I'll put my hand up is something I need to update urgently. So there's a bit of information, but not a lot of information. I need to do it. But best way is always get me on LinkedIn, and I love speaking to people. I love helping. So if you've got any key questions, regs and scaling, team building, that stuff, I was happy to share.
And just so we can find you, what is that website address?
www.sanome, SANOME.com.
Perfect. Well, Benedikt, it's been a pleasure. Thank you so much for being our guru today. I really enjoyed our conversation.
Thanks a lot, Tom. It's a pleasure and an honor, as always, and looking forward to doing a lot more in the future with you.
Thank you. Thank you for listening to MedTech Gurus. I am Sylvester Harris, your MC. If you want to learn more about Tom and his consulting services, you can go to www.pctmedical.com or email Tom at tom@pctmedical.com. Now, I can be reached at Sylvester Harris, that's SylvesterHarris 5048 @gmail.com, and I'd be pleased to discuss any voiceover work that you may want for your company or broadcast. Hey, thanks so much for listening, and catch us on the next episode of MedTech Gurus.